Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to another edition of Hilaal Live, all the way from the Cape Town studios. Jummah Mubarak to you and your family. Thanks for watching us and joining us on channel 347 on Hilaal TV. And now we all know over the last couple of days, South Africa has taken Israel to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, also known as the ICJ in The Hague, claiming genocide has been committed against Palestinians during the Gaza conflict. Now, a charge of genocide before the court in the midst of a heated armed conflict is exceptional. Over the last 2 days, we've heard cases from South Africa that was put forward yesterday and today. It was the turn of Israel that had their turn to have their say. Now, on the line, we would like to invite our viewers to correspond with us on the WhatsApp line if you'd like to give us your thoughts around the very important topics and very important information that's been given both by South Africa and then also the response by Israel. But we will open up the WhatsApp line a bit later for you to comment. On the line joining us now via Zoom is the South African Jews for Palestine, for a free Palestine, Jamie Rosengarten, who is a member. Jamie, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for your listeners for tuning in. Always an honor to talk with you guys.
My absolute pleasure. It's been a couple of interesting days. Let's maybe start with South Africa's appeal yesterday. How proud are we to be South African right now?
I think it's quite immense. I think all of us in South Africa know that we don't have a perfect country, just as we grapple with the lived legacy of apartheid and settler colonialism. What we do know is we understand justice, and that really came through yesterday. And I think on a personal level, I was particularly proud, just as I am South African, although I have no legal, cultural, ethical basis to the land, I am also considered a citizen of Israel. And I just felt incredibly lucky that I could live in a democracy where I would not be complicit in a genocide and forced to fight in an army. And when we were watching the 2 days of the hearing, you know, the morality of these two different states rarely comes out. So I feel immensely proud and immensely lucky to be in South Africa and to be a South African.
Brilliant. Jamie, let's unpack yesterday's ICJ hearing. The South African legal team was very specific in their approach, and a massive team that put their best case forward as well. What stood out for you?
I think a few things. Firstly, just how thorough, it's quite rare that you see such a robust, thorough, one-sided case. We had 84 pages of very methodical fact detailing what was clearly genocide. I think to that point, I deeply respected that our legal team made the concerted choice not to show much footage and imagery, and was very respectful of the victims in their approach. They relied on factual basis and they relied on the law, unlike what we saw today in Israel's hearing. Mm-hmm. But I think the last thing to mention is, although we've seen this genocide unfold before our eyes for the last over 90 days now, it was quite horrifying when you're seeing all this evidence compiled and presented together, just to see the extent of this language met with enactment of genocidal intent that we've seen. Seeing it all together really was quite frightening.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie, as members of South African Jews for a Free Palestine, what is your organization's stance on South Africa's appeal, and how does it align to your mission and objectives?
We are incredibly supportive of South Africa's appeal. Our objective as an organization is what needs to happen immediately is put an end to this madness, put an end to a ceasefire immediately now. It is alarming and frightening and disconcerting that this has gone on for this long and that the international community has allowed this to go on for so long. But more than that, there will only ever be a lasting peace. There will only ever be no violence in this region when there is more long-term political solutions. And that requires the dismantling of Zionism as a political ideology and the dismantling of settler colonialism, and from the river to the sea, an equal state for all its citizenry.
Yeah, I think one of the key points that South Africa's appeal raised was that it's not only between the Palestinian and Israel conflict. I mean, we made mention of conflicts that's happened in various parts of the world, like Myanmar, things like that. And I think this case is paramount and will set precedent on future cases that The Hague will hear. What are your thoughts?
I think absolutely. And the outcome of this case will really reverberate internationally and for the very idea of international law. So I think for anybody who's watched both proceedings over the last 2 days, it's quite clear that on a legal basis, South Africa's case is robust, it is strong, and if this was decided based on, international law, we would win, and there would be an immediate call for a ceasefire now. So the outcome of this case is incredibly interesting, or not to be too demagoguerous.
Yeah.
The very fabric of international law and the legitimacy of that as a concept largely does depend on the outcome that we see here.
Right.
Yeah.
You've been very instrumental in raising your voice around the humanitarian appeal, like most of us have been witnessed, various parts of the world as well. I know that you travel quite a bit. I know that you get involved in various discussions as well. What's currently happening? What are some of the key projects that you are currently busy with?
So I've just recently returned to Cape Town, but thank you for asking that question, because I think just as we are proud of our South Africa's legal team, this wasn't a fight that has only been fought on the legal front. We have been able to have such a great, resounding legal representatives for South Africa because of the daily work millions of South Africans and millions of people across the globe have poured into fighting for Palestine and fighting for a just world. So currently at the moment, the Cape Youth Collective, who is a organization in Cape Town today, they occupy the Civic Center, showing incredible integrity and incredible bravery. Tomorrow there is a global day in support of Palestine, where mass forces are mobilizing. And I think the thing to emphasize here is that just as the legal front is just one front of this battle, and regardless of what happens in that case, we as the global majority will keep on mobilizing and keep on pressuring in every sphere of power to stop this madness.
Okay. I do know that you are in contact with various other organizations, receiving daily updates on the conflict right now between Palestine and Israel. Any updates that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, I think rather than me sharing updates, I would encourage everybody to check the social media of many of the people living in Gaza, Wayed al-Dadu, Mataz, because I think in this period, especially in South Africa, it's easy to get caught up in the euphoria of the case and all that we're doing. But just when you're going onto their Instagram and when you're seeing these stories, it really is just horrifying.
Absolutely.
You know, the bombing doesn't stop at night. The bombing doesn't stop when Israel goes to the ICJ. If anything, this madness is intensifying, just as we've seen yesterday with America launching a mass bombing campaign across the Middle East.
Yeah.
So rather than me share that, I would encourage people to, as difficult and uncomfortable as it is to see a genocide unfold before our eyes, that it is our responsibility to not look away.
Okay. We have a WhatsApp line on our channel that we'd like our viewers to correspond and let us know your thoughts about the proceedings at the ICJ. More importantly, the conflict that's happening between Palestine and Israel. So the line is open. You're welcome to correspond. 079 085 2511. Let us know your thoughts and we'll share them with our viewers as well. Jamie, as someone that's of a Jewish descent and comes from a Jewish family, do you get a lot of flack, being on the right side of justice?
Um, I get, I guess that's the thing to point out is Zionists can be incredibly cruel, and that cruelness is predominantly inflicted on the people of Palestine. But even as a Jewish South African, I have been I've been deeply harassed by many people within the Zionist community. Um, I guess, while it used to have a deep impact on me, at this stage, it very much fuels me on, as there is no moral equivocating about what's going on right now. I think one doesn't need to be South African, one doesn't need to be Jewish, one doesn't need to be anything to understand and have a visceral reaction to what's happening now.
Yeah.
But yes, I do. I have received a lot of really violent and cruel and threats and incitements, but that pales in comparison to the violence inflicted in Palestine.
Well said. Thank you so much for that. We're going to take a short ad break. When we come back, we're going to unpack Israel's counter, thoughts with regards to delivering to the ICJ. That it was their turn today of Israel, and we're going to unpack that just after the break. Do join us after the break and on our WhatsApp line as well, and let us know some of your thoughts on what you feel. Our South African team delivered their argument yesterday, and it was Israel's turn today. 07908525511. That's the all-important WhatsApp line. You are still watching Hilaal Live. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to our coverage of the ICJ appeal, our South African legal team's appeal at the ICJ in The Hague. I'm Lukman Shadrack from the Cape Town studios. We joined via our Zoom link up with a member of the South African Jews for a Free Palestine, Jamie Rosengarten. Thanks once again, Jamie, for taking the time and allowing us to just pick your brain with regards to how everything has unfolded over the last couple of days. We saw the South Africans' case yesterday. It was, 84 pages, and also, highlighting the Genocide Convention Act and the specific acts that Israel has really, gone against as well. It was Israel's turn today for their counter argument. What are some of the points that stood out for you, Jamie?
Well, I think yesterday everyone was very curious as how Israel would respond, because when you were hearing South Africa's case and just how thorough and how robust it is, not only detailing the violence, but detailing the genocidal intent and that repeated language from every sphere of Israeli society. And I raise that point because genocidal intent is usually the most difficult thing to prove. I think most people were deeply curious as how Israel would respond. And their response was as stomach-curdling, as upsetting as I think one could expect. To me, most of their arguments, I think quite clearly, were not on a legal basis. They were intended to appeal to morality and sway public opinion. Yeah. But the ICJ is not decided based on emotion. It is not decided based on public opinion. It is decided based on the rule of law. Yeah. The only grounds where their case was quite legally robust was when it came to looking at technicalities. Much of the case was on the grounds that we had not South African government had not informed Israel of their intentions to take them to the ICJ for charges of genocide, which, even if I think it is quite frightening and revealing, but very unsurprising that when you're being accused of genocide, instead of being able to refute the facts on a legal or moral basis, instead you try to attack the technicalities about how these facts were raised.
Yeah. In your opinion, Jamie, what role can the international legal mechanisms, such as the ICJ, play in addressing this very complex issue that South Africa has brought forward? It's more like a David versus a Goliath in some instances as well. This little country at the tip of Africa taking on a massive country with resources and allies. And to a large point, I think the geopolitical climate may just influence how the case is going to unfold. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think exactly. The world is watching, and the outcome of this case, good or bad, is going to have mass reverberations. The issue with the ICJ is like any court, it can't enforce its ruling. So if Israel is found guilty of committing a genocide, that still falls to the United Nations Security Council to enforce its mandate, or the mandate of the ICJ, which, for those who don't know, is the highest UN legal body in the land. Mm-hmm. And that would mean imposing a ceasefire. So the world really is watching, because I think the point to emphasize is this is not the first time that Israel is out of step with international law. Mm-hmm. There are 45 UN resolutions, human rights resolutions, that Israel is in violation of. To put that into context, 45.9% of all country-specific UN human rights regulations have been committed by Israel. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a significant question, because although that there has been deep skepticism about the effectiveness of these international bodies and whether they serve particular interests or whether they are actually neutral bodies that serve the world. And the outcome of the case will really solidify that and solidify the validity or the lack of validity of international law, depending on whether this outcome can be enforced.
There's also argument that should the South African legal team win their appeal, and if the judgment goes towards their appeal, that there could be political hostility closer to South Africa, more importantly, in the Western Cape. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's incredibly legitimate, both at home in terms of the Western Cape. The DA has been, Democratic Alliance has been alarming in their hostility towards pro-Palestinian protests. They've been operated on an unconstitutional basis, and I wouldn't be surprised if that would intensify. I think globally, the global north is deeply, they will flex their muscles and they're deeply frightened, and they will deeply try intimidate, like there is a likelihood that they may try intimidate South Africa. Mm-hmm. But I think the thing to emphasize now that even the global majority is out of step with these few leaders in America, in Israel, in the UK and elsewhere. And despite what they may attempt to do with South Africa, the global consensus is on our side, because we know this is a moral case. We are a country that knows settler colonialism well. We are a country that knows the cruelty of political violence. And I think that really shines through in our argument, in our legal team, and in our case.
Yeah. The WhatsApp line's open, dear viewer, 079-085-2511. Let us know your thoughts around South Africa's legal team's appeal at the ICJ in The Hague. We'd like to know your thoughts. Maybe you've got various sources of information, and within your community, within your colleague WhatsApp groups, the conversations that's been happening around the ICJ hearing. I think, Jamie, the all-important question right now is that should the appeal go in South Africa's way, we're all hoping it does, how is Israel going to respond? How is the rest of the world going to respond to what the ruling is going to be?
Well, I think how Israel is, the ruling means nothing to Israel. As I said earlier, this is not the first time Israel has been out of touch with international law. Nearly 50% of all country-specific violations of UN, according to the UN, human rights violations have been committed by Israel. The only way this madness will stop is if the international community steps in. And we've seen this repeatedly. When Israel initially bombed Al-Shifa Hospital, they denied bombing Al-Shifa Hospital, and they waited to see how the international community would respond. When nothing was done, they have since bombed and all of Gaza's hospitals, with 30 out of the 35 hospitals in Gaza no longer operational. Yeah. Initially, when Israel killed last year Shireen Abu Akleh of Al Jazeera, they had denied it, and they denied killing journalists, and they waited to how the international community would respond. When nothing was done, they carried on with their mass campaign of targeting journalists, with more journalists being killed in Gaza than any other war zone in history. Yeah. So I think the point to emphasize is Israel, like most fascist states, they do not abide by the law, so they are not going to stop willfully. The only way this will stop is if the international community does if the court rules this way, what is their mandate to stop the violence, to stop this madness. What we've seen historically, though, is the US has veto power in the UN Security Council and has prevented any enforcement of international law. So I guess I'm not. It comes down to that. But either way, whatever happens, I think the main thing is that the legal fight is just one battle, and we will keep on mobilizing and pressuring these governments to do the internationally mandated right to follow through the ICJ ruling and this madness.
Absolutely. We know that this is one of the biggest stages that South Africa has ever been on legally. However, I did, squiz through some of the other media houses in the UK and the US, and not too much is being covered around this case. Not too much has been, spoken about the impact this case may have on the global community. Are you finding that as well?
Yeah, deeply frustrated. I think if you looked at, for example, Sky News and various other UK news stations, they live streamed the hearings of today's case, Israel's argument, but they didn't live stream South Africa's case we made yesterday.
Yeah.
And I think this isn't surprising. The international media has been deeply complicit in this genocide happening. They have allowed it, they have encouraged it. So although not surprising, it is deeply disturbing and deeply unsettling. But I think the other point to emphasize is that even in these global northern countries, large portions of their citizenry are, that today there was an International Day of Youth Action organized that we were part of, which was, we were joined by comrades in America, comrades in The Hague, comrades in these seats of powers. And I think that's what we're seeing quite clearly, is there is a deep out of touch between the leadership of the global north and their citizenry. So although I guess it's unsurprising that these global northern media companies aren't really acknowledging the significance of the case, it's still deeply unnerving.
Absolutely. South African Jews for Free Palestine member Jamie Rosengarten, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thank you for affording us your time. Keep fighting the good fight. It's people like yourselves that highlight the plight of our brothers and sisters in Palestine and various other conflicts that's raised in the world as well. All the very best. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much for having me. Hope your evening's good.
My pleasure. All the best. And there we go. South African Jews for Palestine member Jamie Rosengarten. He's at all the protests. We bump into him all the time. Such a vocal young man and a humanitarian as well. And I think he highlighted various points that it's not about being Jewish, not about being Muslim, not about being Hindu or any other religion you belong to. It's about being part of the human race and being a humanitarian as well. After the break, we link up with another very important individual from Palestine, and we find out about his response to the ICJ ruling that the South African team is currently putting forward at The Hague. You are still watching Hilaal.